Today on L&S Elevate, we have a special guest. This is something I've probably been waiting for a long time. I have a good friend of mine who will be spending time with us, I think, at a critical time, not only in our university's history, but in our nation's history. We are fortunate enough to have Dr. Damon A. Williams, who is the Chief Catalyst Officer for the Center for Strategic Diversity, Leadership, and Social Innovation. Dr. Williams is also the author of the best-selling book, Strategic Diversity Leadership, Activating Change and Transformation in Higher Education, and co-author of the first book ever on Chief Diversity Officers, the Chief Diversity Officer Strategy, Structure, and Change Management. But more important, I think he's becoming what I think is a voice for America and a global voice. Welcome to the show, Dr. Williams.
Thank you so much. Very glad to be here, Badger Nation.
I'm going to just say welcome home. We're going to say welcome home. One of the things I think is really important about our podcast that we like with any guest, and I think it's really important with our conversation to kick off, is to really give our listeners a sense of your origin story. Because I do think your journey really speaks to how you approach your work today in this really critical time in our nation's history. Can you talk a little bit about those important moments along your journey that's kind of got you to this place in time? You know, we try to leave for 10 minutes. I know you got a long story. I didn't read all your awards, but I think there are some critical moments for you that I think have really shaped why you do what you do at this point in time.
Sure. You know, I think I begin, at the beginning, and like so many folks, particularly African Americans, particularly folks from urban inner city environments, I was born to a teenage mother, and my biological father was not very much at all in my life. Suffered with a lot of addictions and challenges, and I think I saw him maybe twice in my life. But I was very blessed to have a great family, great grandparents, great uncles. My mother married when I was 5, and I had a wonderful man who became my father. But there's complications and trauma there. And so I think that oftentimes great things, if it's nurtured correctly, are born out of pain, and they're born out of hurt, and they're born out of an absence of certain types of foundational elements. And so while I would say that I didn't have it as worse or as bad as some, I felt trauma and pain, and that was a part of my background. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, born in Springfield, urban environment, crack house on both corners, latchkey kid, oldest of 3. And did all the things that come from being in those environments and trying to survive in those environments, trying not to get in trouble in those environments. And then at 15 years old, I was whisked away to boarding school. And I went to West Reserve Academy, a wonderful boarding school in Northeast Ohio. I think it's the 26th oldest boarding school in the nation, founded in the 1800s. And interestingly, I was the first second-generation African-American ever to attend my boarding school. And so my father, who raised me, he was a part of the early number of black students who integrated that environment. And so here I was in this environment, which I think now the tuition's maybe $60,000 a year, tuition and fees, something like that. In this environment where there's 8 African Americans, roughly 20 or so students of color, about 360 plus students, co-education, residential. And I'm in this environment, and young people there are thriving academically. And I was the best amongst my peers, but when I got there, I realized there's levels to this.
That's right. I visited Western Reserve as a young admissions counselor. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, there's levels to this.
There's levels to it.
And, it's like this little Ivy-looking institution tucked away in Northeast Ohio in Hudson. And but it was so many ways it was idyllic, because where the pain, the violence, the drugs, the ugliness of the city life was washed away from me.
Yes.
And it became an environment of, you take a 15-minute walk and you're at the drugstore reading comic books and drinking a milkshake, and you feel totally safe for the most part. But there was dynamics of race and dynamics of economics and dynamics of, who had and who did not. I remember young people getting dropped off, to my mind's eye, what looked like a bus. It was an RV. I'd never seen an RV before. I remember a young person had a helicopter, and father dropped him off one time on the soccer field. I took my first drive in a Porsche when I was 15 years old with a classmate. I'm sitting there wondering if I'm gonna have some money in my account to be able to go get that milkshake. And so those economic differences were a challenge. The academic differences were real, but what it did is it created an opportunity for me to rise to an occasion. And it was here where really my interest in issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, organizational change, insiders, outsiders, those who have power, those who do not, it really came to life. And I met an individual by the name of Frank Longstreth, 6'4", snowy-haired white man. And to that point in my life, I really had not had any real substantive interactions with anybody who was of a different race, ethnicity than somebody who was black. Definitely didn't call him mentor, definitely didn't call him teacher, definitely didn't call him someone who had coached me or anything like that. And I was struggling. I was failing Latin. I was struggling academically in geometry, having issues in chemistry. And I'll never forget Stretch. He wasn't even my teacher. He came to me. And this is where legacy and generational status starts to play in. Stretch knew my father, and he had been his coach in baseball. And another individual, another white male named Hal Donnelly, had been my dad's coach in football. And those individuals really leaned in and made sure that I had a home within a home. They made sure that I not only had a home within a home, but they taught me the foundational building blocks of how one achieves success in life. And Stretch said to me, I never forget, he said, Williams, he said, I hear you're having some challenges. And, you know, like many, it's my first time having challenges. I was embarrassed. I was scared. I didn't know how to admit those things. And so I'm sitting there shuffling, and he said, well, I can help you if you trust me. And it was almost like a scene in a movie when I look back on it now. And what he challenged me to do was to come to his house every day, 6 days a week, and do my Latin recitations under his tutoring and do my other homework under his tutoring and the tutoring of his wife. And so ultimately what happened was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday, I went to his house to do my assignments. And at my boarding school, you had mandatory study hall every night. So it was sit at your desk, doing study hall hours from roughly 7 o'clock to lights out every night, or in the library, or at a faculty member's home they all lived on campus under their tutelage. And so what he did is he taught me how, if you start chipping away at something every day, chipping away at something every day, chipping away at something every day, with a consistency and a relentlessness, there's nothing you can't accomplish. And so he implanted in me this notion of how do you really accomplish what you want to accomplish. And so I went from challenges to APA credit. I went from, struggling to I was an academic sophomore by the end of my freshman year, by the middle of my freshman year, by the time I got to college, because I'd earned so many college credits. That was everything for me. But one of the things I came to understand in life over time, that sometimes you experience those lessons the first time and they may not quite take hold the way they need to. And so I got those principles early. I practiced them. Then I went to college, had a great college experience at Miami University. It was there that I really began to continue to fan the flame of understanding. When I was at Reserve, I had done my senior thesis on Malcolm X and the Black Muslims. And so that was the first real scholarly effort that I had attempted to engage these issues intellectually, academically, from a research empirical perspective. And I had set my goal that I wanted to have my paper honored in the Hall of Fame at WRA for one of the papers that earned a 7. And I didn't quite achieve that. I got a 6, but I did very well. And when I got to Miami, there was this real desire to understand these issues, scholarly, academically. I had lived them relationally. I felt very much like an outsider, but I had found community. I had found community not just with this white man and his family and other white faculty and their family, but I also found community in that some of my best friends were Indian students. My best friends were the Chinese students. My best friends were the Muslim students. My best friends were the one Puerto Rican kid who was from New York and the Puerto Rican young women, in addition to the African American students. I ultimately developed some relationships with some of my white colleagues. So I started building this foundation. And what it did is it gave me the skills to interact across difference very fluidly. What it did is it gave me the skills to understand how to apply myself very proactively and relentlessly. what it did is it gave me this interest in understanding things. So all these things then ushered me into Miami, and it just continued from there. Undergrad research opportunities, doing a lot of independent studies. I was a Black World Studies sociology double major, but I was the person who, as a freshman, decided I was going to get a PhD.
Yes.
As a freshman, I made that decision and had wonderful peer mentors. Shout out to many of my fraternity brothers. I was a member of the fraternity Alpha Phi Alpha, and I was in an environment where, the man who pledged me is Dr. Walter Kimbrough. Walter Kimbrough became the president of Albany University. He became the president of Dillard University. He was a two-time president by the time he was 44, 45. Wow. This is a person who mentored me, pledged me in the chapter. Individuals went on to start their own businesses, but many of us went on to be academics. Shout out to my Sans, Dr. Ian Williamson. He's dean of the business school at UC Irvine, full professor, endowed chair. Shout out to my other fraternity brother, Dr. Brian Cook. Dr. Cook is a major higher education, educational policy research executive in Washington, D.C., working in think tanks now. So many of us went on to academic careers. Many of us did. And so there was an environment where fire was coming together and iron was sharpening iron. And we went on to do different types of things academically, different types of things entrepreneurially, different types of things in industry and healthcare. So it was an amazing peer group. And then I went to Michigan. And, Michigan was foundational for me. It was during the time where the Michigan Supreme Court cases were happening. So I got there in 96. Those cases were under Supreme Court review, 97, 98, 99, all the way up to 2001. So it was a time in which University of Michigan became the center of the conversation of diversity, equity, and inclusion in American higher ed as the conversation was going on regarding race being used in higher education admission decisions as a competitive factor. Obviously, now we flash forward to where we are in 2024. The Harvard-UNC decisions of a couple years ago have now ended the use of race as a competitive bonus factor. But at that time, it was being contested on whether it could even be used or not. How could it be used? Is it mechanical points? Is it holistic review? It was the undergrad college. It was the law school. All these things were going on. I worked on the data sets that were used in the legal defense. I was the last dissertation student of a gentleman by the name of Dr. Jerry Gurin, who's one of the 6 founders of the Institute for Social Research. Dr. Gurin, God rest his soul, Dr. Gurin was incredibly influential. It was almost like Frank Longstreth came back again. And like so many, you get into these PhD programs at elite institutions. I was in the #1 department in the country for higher ed. I was at a great school, University of Michigan. I had a fellowship to do my work. The stakes were incredibly high, as De La Soul said. Stakes are high. And so the stakes were incredibly high. I felt that pressure. And I remember early on not feeling like I was good enough, not feeling like I was worthy enough. And I remember going to Jerry, and I'm moaning to him. And at the time, Jerry was, I think, 78. So he was retired. But he still lived the academic life working on this data for the lawsuits because he was one of the great architects of this work in organizational life. And so he had this second career working on this data while I was working in that office. I befriended him. He became a mentor. And I remember he said, well, Damon, if you want me to be your chair, I'll be your dissertation chair. And a whole new possibility was born. And he used to always tell me, write it like you say it. Write it like you say it. So many people are intimidated by producing the written product. And I had always been a pretty good writer, but I would get frustrated because I had a complex around wanting perfection, like so many do when they're endeavoring to put ideas to paper. And what he would always tell me is just write it like you say it. And he would also tell me, don't get lost in the story. Every time we speak on a podcast, every time we give a keynote speech, every time you're giving a presentation to an audience, every time you're engaging in some form of communication, you're telling a story. Every time you're writing a dissertation, you're writing a book chapter, you're writing an article, you're writing a book, you're writing a monograph, you're writing a any type of piece, you're producing that content, you're telling a story. Stories have beginnings, they have middles, they have ends. Every time you're telling that story, you're trying to take your audience on a journey. And so what he started to do is to help me understand story and narrative from a social scientific perspective, because this was an individual who came about in a time period where you couldn't do all the fancy manipulation of the data and all the hardcore analysis of the data. He told me there were summers where he'd spend a whole summer doing a chi-square, a whole summer doing very descriptive analysis. You're doing it by hand.
That's right.
But he was one of 6 founders of the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan, the largest social research center in the world. And this is where I was trained. And so he gave me these fundamental cores, how to ask good questions, how to think about story, how to interpret data to really be about impact, not just about description. These things were so foundational for me. And then on the other side, I was working in this office and I had a 6-figure programming budget as a 22, 23-year-old grad student.
Wow.
So I'm in the #1 department in the country, struggling academically, found my way into this office to work, to do different types of programs. And people are like, how'd you land that opportunity? Well, it didn't start out that way. When I first got to campus, I looked at all of where the offices were that did diversity work, and I set up relational meetings. And so I went to all 10 of them across campus. Soon as I got to campus in my first semester, and then I checked back in with them a second semester. And those leaders received me, and they became my mentors again. Mm-hmm. So the same thing I had done at WRA, the same thing I had done at Miami, I replicated again at Michigan. And now what was being born was an understanding that the world helps those who help themselves. Mm. No one's coming to save you. So you have to save yourself. So for me, it was really leaning into building those relationships. And what I was doing was I was further refining my philosophy as an educator, refining my understanding of what mentorship looked like, refining my understanding of how to be a scholar, but I was also learning how to be a leader. And so I had a programming budget, and I led the Martin Luther King Jr. campus-wide symposium, which at Michigan was a very big deal. It was a 6-figure program. We actually would, across campus at that time, have about 300-plus events that would happen over a course of 6 weeks. Here we are in the early 90s. I've got online web registration platforms that I built. We had built partnerships with the School of Art and Design and had a whole senior design studio working with us on the brand identity. I'm writing memos on my desk that go to my boss's desk, who's the assistant provost, that goes to his boss's desk, who's the vice provost, who ends up on the desk of the president or the provost. Yeah. But it started at my desk. Wow. I'm leading a committee with all these individuals who are assistant dean, associate dean, doing all this work where they're on the MLK committee. I'm steering that committee. I'm guiding their definition of the theme for the year. I'm building out the visual identity as we're presenting to them 5 identities, and we're doing a campus-wide campaign. This is in the 90s. Wow. So this is like really early on. And so I'm learning all these skills of leadership. But it wasn't all about that. Yeah. You know, I actually, with 3 other doctoral students, we created a LLC and we started throwing parties too.
I grew up in Ann Arbor. I know about those things.
So we were doing things outside, inside the academy, learning to be a leader. I met my dear colleague who I wrote the book, the Chief Diversity Officer with, Dr. Katrina Wade Golden, who's Associate Vice President at the University of Michigan and leads their DEI implementation. And she and I forged a lifelong relationship, and we created our first consultancy in 2000, a year before we finished. And we actually landed a 6-figure consulting project as advanced doctoral students. Now, you know, let that resonate with you.
Yes, yeah.
That doesn't happen, right? But, you know, I had done an internship with the Children's Defense Fund. The head of the intern group in the city of Detroit, there was a big grant opportunity. She reached out to me and asked me if I could do some training for her. And I'll never forget this. She said, you know, we'd love for you to come and do some training with college students. And I said to her, okay, I can do that. And she said, well, what do you want? And I said, no, I'm a servant. I'm a servant leader. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't need any money. And to this day, I'm a servant leader. today we're doing a free podcast on post-election DEI strategy implications, and we've got over 600 people that are signed up to come to that free series as a part of what we do. We do a free platform every semester that we help leaders across the country, whether you can pay for a service or not, because that's what it means to lead and to serve and to do this work. But at the same time, to go back to 2000, she said, "What do you want?" I said, "I'm a service." She said, No, baby, I got a grant. Now, you don't got to tell me twice now. She said, "What do you want?" And so I went, and I'll never forget, I went to some of my mentors in the Center for the Study of Higher and Post-Secondary Ed, and I pulled some of the proposals, so I wrote a little proposal to do this training. She said, "Fine." I did the training. She then came back and said, "Yeah, you know anybody who does program evaluation? We need a program evaluation." Well, I had just taken a program evaluation course. I had just completed my method sequence at Michigan. And I said to her, "What are you looking for?" She said, "Well, I need somebody who can do this, do that." And so I wrote a proposal. And I submitted it to her. And she said, "Well, this is a little bit more than what I can fund." She said, "Let's kick this up to the lead investigator." So kicked it up to the lead investigator. And they said, "Let's do it." Because in their mind's eye, I was a researcher at the University of Michigan, not a doctoral student. And I think that's enormously important for those who are listening, is you have to step into your possible self to achieve that possible self. It's not just about doing things as others construct them for you. And so at every step of my career, from WRA all the way, I was leaning into a possibility. Leaning into a possibility. I was controlling my destiny. I was also attracting and manifesting energy. And so as I'm attracting and manifesting Frank Longstreth and Harold Donnelly, as I'm attracting and manifesting at Miami University, Susan Mosley Howard and Rodney Coates and Othello Harris, who are my faculty. And as I go to the next level, I'm attracting and manifesting Dr. John Matlock, Dr. Jerry Gurin, Dr. James Jackson, Dr. Patricia Gurin. I'm manifesting Dr. Marv Peterson. I'm bringing these people, and then they're adding something because I'm showing a precociousness and a will to do the work. I'm here back home at UW-Madison, so thankful and humble. I received this award yesterday. The most touching aspect of seeing this award was when they did the video montage of people across the country and across campus who gave testimonies to my contribution. They tapped my daughter.
Yeah, that was powerful. That was a powerful moment.
My daughter at the end, she was the last voice, and I was a blubbery mess, Podcast Nation, Badger Nation. And inside of it, it was incredible because her words were the words that I try to inspire in the world. But if you can't inspire those words in your own children, in your own home, then you're giving a false sermon. My success ultimately will not be defined by the books, by the thousands of people, by the organizations I touched. Even though I've had a chance to do all these great things, it will be defined by what does that little girl become in the world, because she will carry that legacy. And so if I'm giving a sermon in the world, but I'm not living a sermon at home, what am I really doing? And that is something that my wife, Keisha, has helped to even more crystallize for me, that understanding. And that little girl healed my soul from so much trauma from previously. But to hear her say, "Daddy, I'm so proud of you getting this award today."
That's right.
She said, "You did the work.
You did the work.
You put in the time."
Yes.
That is magical for me. And so as I was doing all these different things and through these different educational experiences, and then that pushed me into the world.
Yeah.
And so and those, I would say, those are the foundational pieces of how I got here today.
And this is so important, and there's a reason why I wanted you to really kind of set the table, because I think it has been important in terms of how you've driven and thought about this work in the world. There's a lot of folks who have approached work around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging from a number of perspectives, but I think it informs your framework. We talked about this a lot. I think it informed how you approached your best-selling book. There's a way in which you drive change that I think is important, and it's the kind of tools I think you are bringing into the world today as we're facing, as you always talk about, unsettled ground, right, in a way. But it started from this origin. It's built up. Can you talk a little bit about how that has driven into how you've, developed and influenced strategies? You were one of the leading authors on Inclusive Excellence. It's a framework that's evolving on our campus. In addition to your work, how's it informed the way you've approached your practice, your research, and helped other folks think about approaching this work, even as we're trying to go through this kind of unsettled period in our nation's history?
Sure. It's a great question. And, one of the things I think we all have to do is you have to spend a lot of time thinking about your gifts and how you want to build your gifts and who you want to be in the world. Very early on, I made this determination. I wanted to be amongst the best in the world at issues of DEI and organizational change. I wanted to bring those things together, right? So for me, it's a constant shaping and development of a skill set, of a toolkit, of an understanding of how to be amongst the best in the world at DEI and organizational change. Along that journey, I also came to understand I had to also be very, very good in this idea of inspiring hope and possibility in people. And I had to become even better at understanding how to figure things out, how to lean in and figure stuff out. One of the things that Dr. Wade Golden, who introduced me yesterday, talked about, she said, when there's problems in the world around these issues, Damon tries to run towards the problem. And I believe it's so important to run into the storm and then put your instrumentation down and understand the storm system. So for me, when things happen like COVID, right? So when COVID-19 happened, our team lost our whole portfolio of work because everybody was was at home. And I remember going to my team and I said to them, look, this is going to be all about DEI at some level. Health equity, DEI. And I said, let's tool up. Let's go do some work. So we had 3 weeks where we didn't have anything to do. So we went off and wrote the COVID-19 DEI Crisis Action Strategy Guide. And it's a 30-page guide that had over 100 recommendations. It's beautifully designed by our designer and evidence-based. And we put it out in 3 weeks. And it went viral. And it was downloaded tens of thousands of times. Our first webinar we had like 5,000-6,000 people sign up for the webinar. We were helping individuals, and now we had a new relevance in this conversation. And so I'm a big believer that you have to believe you can figure something out. You then go and do the research to be evidence-based as much as you can. You put something into the world that makes a contribution. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then in the world we live in now, the world will choose whether your content is worthy of utilization. When we wrote Inclusive Excellence in 2002, 2003, shout out to the American Association of Colleges and Universities, who had the foresight, and Dr. Alma Clayton Pedersen had the foresight, who was a VP there at the time, to say we need a framework, an alloy, a foil for how to think about this work in a post-Michigan Supreme Court environment. And what she really got into as she convened this group of scholars, and she did something so brilliant and so manifesting of what it means to not just be a mentor, but to be a sponsor of possibility. See, a lot of times we talk about mentorship, and mentorship is critical to being successful, but we don't spend enough time talking about this idea of sponsoring individuals into opportunity, right? And so what she did is she said, hey, we're going to bring these 3 teams together to think about the future of American higher ed. And she brought together the legendary Dr. Estella Ben-Simone. She brought together the legendary Dr. Mitchell Chang, the legendary Dr. Joe Berger, and other leading scholars. And she said, we're going to pair those scholars with junior scholars, emerging people. I had just finished my PhD. I was at the University of Connecticut. I was asked to be on that team. But a quick backstory, people ask, well, how did you get tapped amongst all the thousands of new doctoral students? I was manifesting it. And I was at an event, a conference, AAC&U. I had just got appointed as the youngest assistant vice provost in the country. I was 29 years old, assistant vice provost, assistant vice chancellor at UConn, University of Connecticut. Shout out to Dr. Ronald Taylor, senior vice provost, legendary scholar, wrote the first book on black males who had hired me. I was at this conference. I'm at the conference and I saw Dr. Pedersen. Dr. Pedersen had collaborated with one of my faculty colleagues, Dr. Eric Dye, God rest his soul, and Dr. Sylvia Hurtado, who's now at UCLA, a true legend. And they had wrote this monograph on campus climate. And I'm a huge person in believing in giving people their flowers, giving them honor and love, thanking them for what they did. Because as educators, there's nothing greater. As scholars, there's nothing greater to realize you put an idea in the world, and I never met you personally, but I impacted your life. Wow. And so I saw her, I ran up, I said, oh, Dr. Pedersen, Dr. Pedersen. I said, I love your work, I love your work. And that conversation was fairly quick. Came back to that same conference 2 years later. So that was 2001 when I finished my dissertation. 2003, she started launching Inclusive Excellence. Came back to that conference, saw her again. Ran up on her again, and she remembered me. So I remember you. She said, "You're the baby vice provost. You're the baby provost up at UConn," because I was so much younger than everybody else walking through these doors. And she said, "Well, I'm convening a conversation today," and she was bringing together these groups to think about the future of DEI at her conferences, DEIB. Before we were talking about the B. And she had all these leaders around the room, all these leading scholars. And I knew these folks because I'm a huge believer as well that you have to identify people who are doing the types of things you want to do so that you can reverse understand how they got there.
That's right.
See how they go about their business. So I looked around the room and was like, oh, that's Dr. Mike Nettles, and that's Dr. Hurtado, and that's this person and that person, and that's vice president this and vice provost. These were people that in my mind's eye were legends. Were at this conference, and they're all going around. And she had everybody go around and everybody got to speak, which is really important when you have leaders and groups that are of different types of seniority. Everybody has to have an opportunity to speak. The least amongst us by reputation and brand, and the most amongst us by reputation and brand. That's how you get the best ideas. And so when it got around to me, I started talking about the importance of an organizational, strategic change management approach to this work. I said there's so much stuff that is being done, and the unit of analysis is the student. The unit of analysis is the policy. The unit of analysis is learning. The unit of analysis is more at a psychological, sociological, political, or even philosophical base. When is the unit of analysis turned to the organization as the unit? Well, we're talking about strategy, structure, leadership, collaboration, integrative mechanisms, foundational resources, accountability systems, scorecards. I said, this is the type of work that I want to do in my career. Everybody was kind of quiet. No one had said that. Dr. Pedersen's brilliant. She came back to me after, said, I really appreciated what you said. And we left. I went back home. A month later, I got a phone call. I said, hey, I'm putting together these teams. One of the teams is going to be a change management team. I'd love you to be on that team. So I joined that team. Joe Berger, Professor Berger, Provost Berger at University of Massachusetts, Boston. Provost Berger was the head of that team. Again, another white male, incredible scholar, incredible educator, incredible person. Joe brought these teams together. We start meeting, and I was so passionate about it. Joe did something that so many senior scholars don't do. But it's what, for me, began to foundationally help me understand what it meant to be an ally. True allyship is not just being a upstander who says things publicly in meetings. There's all these personas of being an ally, and one of them is to be a sponsor. Alma Pedersen understand how to be a sponsor. Joe Berger understood how to be a sponsor. He said, Damon, your thinking is so clear and your passion is so great. I'm going to let you be the first author on this. So here he was as a full professor with all the trappings and the idiosyncrasy credits that come in. He fell back. And I love Joe for that forever. He fell back. I became the first author on the paper towards a model of inclusive excellence and change. And there were 3 papers that were written, and the other papers were fantastic as well. And I'll never forget, AAC and U came back to us and they said, hey, we're going to publish all the papers digitally because we don't have resources to print them. Now, this is 2002.
Yeah.
Now, when they tell you that they're publishing a paper in 2002, you don't know if it's really coming out, if it's only going to be digital.
That's right.
So you're questioning all of that, right?
Yeah.
You're questioning all that. And so inside of it, I'm like, okay, well, they're all coming out. Then they come back a couple couple months later, as we're into the project, and they say, well, we have funding now to publish 2 of them in print, and all 3 will be digital. Okay. Which paper do you think was not done in print? The change management paper.
That's right.
The paper that was being led by the junior scholar, the paper that candidly was being articulated in a way that was more different. The other paper was on student learning. The other was on equity and policy. And this was on change management. But which one has probably endured the most? Which one got downloaded the most? Yeah. It was the one that was more novel. Yeah. So one of the things I think is really important for young scholars is to believe, for all scholars, is to lean into how you can produce product and content that is your best you can do, but try to lean into spaces where the conversation is looking for solutions and looking for fresh ideas and looking for different takes. And that launched me into producing scholarship, thought leadership, consultancy, leadership, that was bringing together these worlds of diversity, equity, inclusion, and change, and trying to manifest them in difficult moments, whether it was what do we do after the Michigan Supreme Court cases, what do we do in terms of COVID-19, or even now, what do we do in terms of the great DEI reset that's happening as there is a cultural, legislative, legal, executive level push to constrain and evolve our DEI approach to the work.
So as we're thinking about that in our current moment, one of the things that I know we're, as we talked about, is really being informed by the work that you've done around inclusive excellence, but we're also thinking about what it means to live the Wisconsin idea and the Wisconsin experience. Mm-hmm. You and I have worked a long time. I've always operated from this. How does this think about from our mission and our purpose, right? I've always kind of driven a lot of my strategies around that, particularly here at the university. As we are in this time, how do you talk we have a number of faculty and folks who are listening to think about the way in which we can do this mission-driven work. I think the Wisconsin idea and the Wisconsin experience are really clear visions across higher education. I haven't seen too many other ones that are as clear as these two. Can you talk a little bit about how we might think about this in this unsettled time, given what you understand in driving this kind of mission-driven focus around these two, I think, really important concepts we have here?
So, when I arrived at University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2008, yes. I knew nothing about the Wisconsin idea. Right?
I remember the early days.
I didn't know anything about the Wisconsin idea. I didn't know anything about winnowing and sifting. I didn't know anything I didn't know I was going to come to my office every day and walk past Abraham Lincoln's statue. I had no idea any of these things, right? But I had no understanding of how special Badger Nation is. One of the things I like to say is that I was born a Buckeye in the shadow of Ohio State. I was bred and empowered in this work as a Wolverine, as a proud alumni of the University of Michigan. But I was forged and fired as a leader in Badger Nation.
That's right.
And a huge part of that forging and firing that happened here was really around understanding this notion of the Wisconsin idea. And I think that aspects of an organization, an institution's symbolism is so important to help you as a beacon to guide you through these times of uncertainty, to guide you through times in which you don't know what's coming next. You're dealing with policy environments that are evolving greatly. You're dealing with legal and cultural environments that may be evolving greatly. We're in a time that I refer to as VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It's a time of VUCA. And it's not just what's going on with DEI, it's what has happened with the pandemic. It's how work accelerated, learning accelerated from a technology perspective, 15 to 20 years as a result of the pandemic. It's the fact that we have so many surges of global conflict that have local implication, Israel, Palestine, and what is going on with precious members of the Jewish community, precious members of the Palestinian community, the pain that we see on our institutions, the Me Too movement, the DACA movement, the Dakota Pipeline movement, the Brexit movement in UK, the Me Too, the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, there's so many dynamics. So we're constantly dealing with something. I'm doing a climate and culture study for an institution, and a member of the senior faculty member said to me, "Well, I don't know if this is the right time to do it because things are so uncertain." And I said, "When has it not been uncertain over the last 5 years? It's our new normal as VUCA." So I think in moments of VUCA, parts of our cultural tapestry, our symbolic tapestry, like the Wisconsin idea, becomes so important, right? This notion that the university exists to expand the possibilities of the people and the world. And that is a value system that has to speak to all the people.
That's right.
Not just some of the people. Not just those people who are of a certain identity, that have a certain orientation of how they live their life in the world, that have a certain type of number of zeros in their bank account. There's a call to action, and that is about values. So one of the things I've been saying a lot as we are in this moment of anti-DEI and this idea of the importance of values was really born in me in the way it is when I came here as vice provost and associate chancellor years ago. But it's this idea that the policy environment may change, but our values do not. How we have to talk about the work may change, but our values do not. What is legal and what is not may change, but our values do not. And that means we have to continue to create, to innovate, to pivot, to have the growth mindset, to be agile, to try, create, test, do, get proofs of concept, and then scale up what works. This work has always been about evolving it. It's never been the same. Now, I believe we're in a moment we're going to see more aggressive shifting than we have in the last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. That's why I'm beginning to think about it and frame this even more as this great DEI reset that we're in the midst of right now. And this reset that is occurring is impacting our environment, both in the private sector, in healthcare, in higher education, in K through 12. And to be clear, all of the reset is not good. Yeah. Much of it is painful in some ways, but the values don't have to change, even though the approach may need to get reset.
You know, as I thought about it, what I've always appreciated about you is paying attention to the rigorousness of our approach. And it kind of came to order yesterday as I was thinking about it. There was a comment around unconscious bias not working, but the next thing was like, no, it's unconscious education versus training, right? So the speaker said it works when you do training. So it wasn't about unconscious bias not working. It was the methodology, the approach, and the modality of how it was delivered. And this notion of really being critical around understanding how we're implementing whatever strategy, I've always appreciated about you because you've really focused on those things as a way of measuring effectiveness and outcomes in a way that I don't see a lot of folks having that lens. And I think my ability to kind of unpack that has a lot to do with by the time I spent with you. It was quickly I was saying, no, that's not about, it's about we've always known that these interventions don't work because we haven't had the commitment, as Frank Hale Jr. would say, commitment without currency is counterfeit. We've always started with education because that's where people were comfortable, even though that might not have the outcome, versus a learning modality that would be much more intense. Yeah. As we think about these strategies moving forward, how do we continue to get people to understand the rigorousness of the approach, the commitment to that as a really important part of this work versus what might feel good? Yeah. Right. You and I have had that kind of conversation. And I think it's important for us to elevate that because there are some distinctions that people don't always recognize.
It's such a great theme and thread for our discussion. So, and I got a lot to say here because it's really important to me. First off, I would say that, that comment, I wasn't there for the comment, but I think I'm understanding it. Is a lot of the approach that we use with respect to bias and unconscious bias, implicit bias, other ways that we frame bias has not, quote unquote, worked. Yeah. And a part of it is we don't attend to the social science that undergirds the cognitive principles of in-groups and out-groups and how we develop habit loops
Yes.
that become the foundation of how bias exists in our world. Some of the greatest scholars in the world on bias are right here at UW-Madison.
That's right.
You know, Professor Fine, Professor Sheridan, individuals who have engaged in this work at Madison and talk about bias as habit.
Yes.
And how do you break the habit of bias? Well,
Yes.
you don't break the habit of bias by just understanding that bias lives in the world. That's a part of it.
Yes.
Foundationally, you have to understand there is bias. We all have it. You have to help people understand how they have it. But you also have to take them through interventive steps to understand how to break biases habit.
Yes.
For example, one of the ways that you break biases habit is by having something that cognitively primes you to be aware of bias in the moment that bias is getting ready to potentially happen. For example, we're in a search committee, right? In that search committee, before you go in and you start evaluating content on paper or you start interviewing someone, there should be a script that is verbally read and a moment of pause. So everyone thinks about these 5 ways of how bias can potentially come into our conversation, and we all should be aware of that. Now we're creating a cognitive trigger. Think about it like this. If you are in the mode of needing to buy a new car, right? And you determine you want to get that new Tesla. I think I'm going to try this electric car, right? What happens before you make that decision, you never see that car because that car lives in your subconscious and you're not cognitively triggered and primed to be aware of it. But soon as you move forward and say, I'm looking for this car and I'm considered, now it's primed. Now it sits at the front of your consciousness. So when you see those cars everywhere now, so, oh, there's one there. There's one there. Oh, I saw one here. Now it's primed. So what happens in terms of breaking, a part of the process of breaking bias's habit loop is you have to prime it right before it's going to happen.
That's right.
And you have to engage that and be locked in. So then when it occurs, and you also have to, in that group context, empower individuals to say, if you see it, let's name it so we can unpack it. See, that's about just telling you we've got bias. Everybody, that's not enough. That's foundation. So a part of what I've come to understand is you have to be, if you want to really be good at doing DEI change work, whether it's, again, at the level of training and human capability building, which is where bias is, or at the level of building strategy at a meta level in terms of recruitment, retention, eliminating achievement and equity gaps in student achievement, or increasing the rate to tenure for underrepresented groups, or improving climate and lived experience for individuals who are gender identity diverse, whatever it is, you got to be serious about the social science. And one of the things I understood is that required to me to be discipline agnostic. Let me say that again. It required me to be discipline agnostic. I go to whatever set of evidence-based ideas are helpful me to understand and make meaning of my world, and importantly, to understand how to produce content, product, strategy, scholarship that's going to help change happen. I have a library of about 10,000 books, which are the bane of my wife's existence. Because everywhere we go, the library has to follow, right? Don't buy as many books now as I used to, but those books cover so many topics. And so there's stuff that at one point in my life I was very consumed and interested in, anthropological, sociological. Another time in my career I was very interested in competitive strategy, business, scorecarding. There's other parts I was interested in narrative building and media and communication, and other parts I was interested in social media and new forms of media. Other parts I was interested in racial identity and racism, and other parts I was interested in the history of the women. So there's all these different things, and you know, you know this about me. You know, I'm a huge fan of Kobe Bryant.
Yeah.
Right. Kobe Bryant was someone I mused throughout my entire career, because Kobe was a 17-year-old draftee in the NBA, and I was the youngest student pretty much ever admitted at the University of Michigan Center for the Study of Higher Ed to do their PhD, amongst the youngest, and the first black male that had been admitted to the program in well over 15 years, maybe near 20, particularly that was coming pretty much out of an undergrad context. So I was so young, just like he was. So to see what he accomplished in his career and how he approached it was very analogous to how I was trying to approach my career and what I've been trying to get done. And one of the things he said, God rest his soul, early on, he said he came to understand that if he did more in a day, every day, for days, for weeks, for months, particularly over the summer. And he talked about spending about 10 to 12 hours a day working out. So he'd work out for 2 hours, take a break, work out for 2 more hours, take a break, work out for 2 more hours, take a break, and he'd do it for like 12 hours. Where others were only putting in maybe one session of 3, or at most 2 sessions of a total of 4. He was going to double and triple the time people put into it to build a skill set that ultimately would have no holes in the skill set, right? He could do every part of the aspects of the game, and no one would be able to replicate the skill set because he had put time on his side of decades of doing it. That's the way I tried to approach my work. To put all these fundamental building blocks into my understanding from the time I was 18 years old, doing the study on Malcolm X and the Black Muslims, through the studies that I did as an undergrad in the same general areas, through the things I did in my master's degree, through the things I did in my PhD program, not just doing what was necessary for class, but always doing what was necessary to build competence, to be really, really good. This was never the backup plan for me. My wife, in her commentary that she gave in the testimonial, she said, "I'm so happy for you, Damon." She said, "Because I know no one that lives more in their purpose than you have, and I've seen that across 20 years." Right?
Yes.
So putting those building blocks together, trying to bring so much different understanding together, such that it's very synthetic. So people will hear me, and I'm talking very much about, disclosure risk, right? In complex survey analysis or multivariate modeling of the data. And then I'm flipping it over, talking about, how do we have to hold space in this moment to experience the pain of loss and the process of grieving that is manifesting as so many were disappointed by what happened last Tuesday, right? Yeah. And then I'm flipping it and talking about, well, we've got to create strategy, structure, alignment. This is not just about hiring the nearest person of color or the nearest woman or the nearest individual from an underrepresented group to be the DEI officer. No, strategically, what are we trying to accomplish? That's right. And then how do we align the structure to accomplish that? And then how do we find the right talent to be in that structure? And then how do we align that? Well, that's like 5-6 different disciplines that I just talked about in 90 seconds. All of them are necessary to be world-class at doing what we write about in my book, strategic diversity leadership, right? Shout out, so much love for those who do research sociologically, anthropologically, critical race theory, psychology, all these other areas. I want to pull from the best of all these traditions. Strategic diversity leadership is an applied, artful science. That's right. So we try to bring those things together to help manifest inclusive excellence.
Well, we started with you with your origin story. You've laid out incredible information I think is going to be great for our readers. But we always like to end with talking about, because you put so much in, what do you do that feeds your soul and brings you back to center?
I talked about this yesterday. My family, both in the micro, family that lives in my house, me, my wife, my daughter, but also more broadly, my daughter healed my soul. All the trauma and the gaps that I felt from the dynamics of my young childhood, my early formative years, my daughter healed so much of that, right? And so anytime I'm off center, I spend a little time with that little girl, and I am right back to where I need to be. So she's always my get right. My wife does an amazing job of creating these beautiful experiences for our family. Whether it's a birthday, whether it's, a vacation, whether it's a tour of an art museum, or whether it's going to a concert. And left to my own devices, I will work, and I will work, and I will work.
I know that.
And I will work, and I will work I will work myself to nothing, which is not healthy and it's not good. And my wife helps to find the experiences that create balance for us and bring joy into our life. And I think one of the things that's missed in all this conversation of strategy and DEI is you have to create spaces for joy. For joy to manifest itself is what empowers and emboldens you to do great things. The beautiful space that was carved out by Vice Chancellor LeVar Charleston, Assistant Vice Chancellor Angela Miller, Assistant Vice Chancellor Raul Leon, and the beloved community yesterday that gave me that award at the 15-year anniversary of the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Educational Achievement that I was a part of founding and had the vision for 15 years ago. What brought me home, that was a joy-filled moment. And what happens in those moments, there's an exchange of energy. And they poured energy into me, which empowers me to do what I need to do. At a micro level, that's what my family does. So that's a huge part of it. Finding those spaces of joy, particularly rooted in family. My favorite time of the year is upcoming Thanksgiving. My family comes to my home in Atlanta, Georgia. No one came to visit me in snowy Madison, Wisconsin, I must say.
Yeah, I know that.
Right, but Atlanta, Georgia, they will come, and so I'm going to have about 40, 50 people over the course of family and friends that will touch our home, which is beautiful. It's the most special time of the year. I get to be with them. I grew up with those traditions. Those traditions went away. Me and my wife, through her leadership, I want to shout her out for what she does every day, have created this magical time period. And then the other is I'm a Lakers fan.
I know that.
I'm a sports fan, but I'm even more now because I'm so busy. I'm a Lakers fan, and I'm a believer that you have to just make choices demonstratively. I made the choice that I wasn't going to be a football fan anymore. I wasn't going to do fantasy football anymore. I wasn't going to be a college sports fan anymore. I just don't have the time. My Lakers are my passion, so I watch every single Laker game. I record every game. I get to 4 or 5 games a year. In another conversation, we could talk about what all that means. But,
yeah, we know we will.
But that's my passion. So it's my family, and it's my Lakers are the things that renew me. But I'm also renewed in the work. I'm renewed when I see people who it's impacting and benefiting, and that recharges me because I don't honestly feel like I work a day in my life. I live in my purpose. And sometimes that purpose gets you a compensation. Sometimes it's going to a job. Sometimes it's producing a book or something that generates something. But largely, it's not even work. It's just living in purpose and trying to do good things in the world that benefit and help people.
On behalf of the many thousands of institutions and I think many more people I know you've touched, and either by meeting them in person or them reading your material, on you showing up at times when we really need you, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's what we're going through right now. We just want to thank you for all you do. And from Badger Nation, we as we said, welcome home. You will always be a Badger, and it's good to have you on L&S Elevate. And thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, and on Wisconsin.